How's it going, everyone? It's Harvey from Weather Swan Drop. How's the day? It's May 18th, 2021, and today this is going to be the complete hurricane season outlook for 2021. So I'm going to go into every factor that will determine the amount of hurricanes you should experience for this year and which regions in the Atlantic should experience the most storm formations or even potentially the most tropical cyclone landfall as well. Before I begin, make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather content. Make sure to like if you like this video and make sure to turn on post notifications if you want to see even more weather content. So let's first take a look at the IR loop for the entire northern Atlantic, and you see that where the pretty much the entire Atlantic is swallowed up by just a ton of dry air. There isn't much convection, much in anywhere throughout the northern Atlantic. We do have some areas right around Cuba receiving some thunderstorm activity, as well as closer to Louisiana and Texas as a result of a trough moving through a shortwave trough that's has been bringing flash flooding around Louisiana and Texas, which I'll go into in a little bit in future videos. But as you can see, most of the Atlantic is primarily dry, which is typical. We're in the month of May. The hurricane season hasn't even begun yet. So it's typical to see conditions this dry early in the season when the sea surface temperatures aren't high enough to really induce very strong lift in the atmosphere, and there's still unstable air just steering a lot of that dry air from the desert of Mexico into the Atlantic. So as a result, the entire Atlantic is just being swallowed by dry air and just a lot of wind shear. However, that is expected to change, not only because we're going to get more into the more active months of the hurricane season, but we also have a good chance of entering into a La Nina phase during the peak of the hurricane season. So this is the latest update from the CPC probability when it comes to the Enzo pattern, where in my last video, which I did I think a couple of days ago now, it was updated as of April 13th or April 12th of 2021. But now this is the latest update from May 13th, 2021. So there's only 5 days old, and you see now in the latest update there's now a higher probability of a La Nina than there is a neutral phase during September, which is certainly concerning because in my last video, the probability of a neutral season was more likely during the month of September, but now it seems like the tide has shifted, and now the computer models are now leaning more towards a La Nina headed into the month of September, which is certainly concerning because the La Nina could certainly make it another very active year. We have to wait and see if this continues over the next several months. And I want to at least put it out there that although at this point the La Nina forecast probability is higher than the neutral phase, it isn't that much higher to make it, I'd say, more likely than not we're going to experience a La Nina pattern, because the probability of a La Nina pattern is still less than 50%, and the same goes for the neutral pattern, but they're pretty much neck and neck when it comes to the probability. So it could definitely still go either way, but the fact that now the computer models are now leaning more towards La Nina headed into the peak of the hurricane season during the month of September, that certainly is concerning because it could maybe continue to trend that a La Nina during the peak of the hurricane season could certainly happen. And you might be asking, what does this mean if we're going to be in the La Nina phase or even a neutral phase for this hurricane season, which a neutral phase is pretty much most likely throughout the early months of the hurricane season, which includes June and July, and even August. There's a neutral pattern is more likely than a La Nina pattern. So you might be asking, what does all this mean? Well, during a La Nina pattern, that's when the sea surface temperatures right around the eastern Pacific are much cooler than average, which means that there's more sinking air in this region, and there's pretty much more divergence occurring along the surface in this region. And when we see more divergence in this region, when we see more stable air in this region, it allows a lot of troughs or low pressure systems in the Atlantic to sort of have an area where they could release a lot of that their latent heat into an area where the air is sinking. Because the thing is that during an El Nino phase, it becomes difficult for low pressure systems or tropical cyclones to release a lot of that latent heat because it's pretty much competing with a lot of with hefty lift in the atmosphere that's occurring during an El Nino phase in the Eastern Pacific, where the water temperatures are warmer than average, the troughs are stronger than average in the Eastern Pacific, and as a result, they not only take away a lot of energy from a lot of these troughs along the surface, but they also prevent a lot of these troughs and tropical cyclones in the Atlantic to pretty much breathe out a lot of latent heat because there's so much rising air in this region. The latent heat that a lot of these tropical cyclones or low pressure systems in the Atlantic produces isn't really doesn't really have an area where it could sink down as a result of just the amount of lift that's occurring in the Eastern Pacific during an El Nino phase. So it's pretty much forced to stay over a hurricane, which limits convection, which limits instability, and as a result, it weakens a lot of tropical cyclones and low pressure systems in the Atlantic, which means that tropical cyclone development overall is less likely during an El Nino phase, but during a La Nina phase, the complete opposite happens where the latent heat that a lot of these hurricanes produce has an area to go to and sink down, which is in the Eastern Pacific, where there isn't much lift at all in the atmosphere as a result of a cooler than average sea surface temperatures, making the air molecules not very buoyant at all. So it becomes easier for tropical cyclone development as a result, and also since the air is so stable here and there's not really that many troughs, that means that there isn't going to be a lot of upper level winds going against the a lot of these hurricanes going against the surface trade winds, which is one of the main things that prevents hurricane development is pretty much strong wind shear. And during an El Nino phase, we're more likely to see stronger westerly upper level winds. However, during a La Nina phase, we're less likely to see that. So more hurricanes are possible during a La Nina phase and even a neutral phase, because during a neutral phase it sort of mimics more of a La Nina influence and an El Nino influence. So whether it's a La Nina or neutral phase for this hurricane season, it's still more likely than not it's going to be more active when it comes to tropical cyclones, because either the neutral or La Nina phase is certainly very impactful when it comes to the hurricane season, and both have a tendency of bringing more tropical cyclone development into the Atlantic. So that's something we certainly need to keep have regards towards for this hurricane season. Now, another thing that we need to take a look at, which is also another pretty important factor, is the when it comes to determining the wind shear in the Atlantic, is the Atlantic oscillation, I meant to say. And typically what this means is that when we're in the negative phase, that means there's more jet stream dips. So that means it's more likely we're going to see less tropical cyclone development, because since there's more jet stream dips, there's more wind shear in the Atlantic, and that wind shear disrupts hurricane development. However, if we're in a positive Atlantic oscillation during the summer months or during the hurricane season, that means jet stream dips are less likely to happen and we're more likely to see tropical cyclone development. As you can see, over the past several months, we've been in a negative phase. However, the concerning thing is that since we've been in a negative phase for quite some time now, since early April, and now we're in the middle of May, so over a month and a half, my concern is that since we've been in a negative phase for quite some time now, and it's expected to continue over the next several days, it's concerning because typically negative phase doesn't last for months on end or years on end, and you could probably tell just by looking at this line graph, where we do have several months where we were in the positive phase between the months of February and into the month of April. However, it dropped down to negative and it's staying at negative for several months. So typically, an Atlantic oscillation is sort of a several month pattern. Of course, there are some fluctuations with how negative it is, but for the most part, it's sort of a pattern that lasts for several months. And since we've been in a negative phase just before the hurricane season, my concern is that it's gonna go back into a positive phase since because it can't really be in the negative phase forever. And what that means is that if we're in a positive phase come the most active part of the hurricane season, August and September, that could mean that we're going to be in for just a very active hurricane season with just a lot of tropical cyclone development, and because there's just going to be lack of wind shear as a result of lack of jet stream dips due to a positive Atlantic oscillation. So as of right now, the forecast remaining is maintaining the fact that it's gonna stay negative over the next several days. However, the concern is that it will get back into the positive phase come June and July, and there's that possibility maybe in August or September it could get back down to negative. We just have to wait and see. It's very difficult to forecast the Atlantic oscillation, so we just need to wait and see. But I'd say um, I'd be concerned about this, especially since it's likely we're going to be in a positive oscillation when the hurricane season comes through. And another thing we also need to keep in mind when it comes to determining the amount of wind shear in the Atlantic is the amount of the precipitation anomaly in the Atlantic. So you might be asking, well, what does this have to do with wind shear, and what pretty much the precipitation anomaly shows is if there's a strong monsoon in the Saharan desert region, because if there's more precipitation than average right around the southern Saharan desert region, that means that Africa is currently in a monsoon season, and that means the upper level winds are more likely to move towards an easterly direction, which would promote hurricane development because pretty much the easterly winds from the upper level winds will coincide with the surface trade winds, and that results in a lack of wind shear because pretty much what wind shear means is a change in wind direction or wind speed within height. And when the wind direction of the upper level winds and lower level winds are pretty much exactly the same, that means that there's very weak or limited wind shear in the main development region. However, if there is less precipitation than average throughout the southern Saharan desert region, that typically means that you guys aren't in a monsoon season, and as a result, westerly upper level winds are more likely, which would inhibit tropical cyclone development. But if we take a look at the precipitation anomaly you see in July, it certainly becomes concerning for southern Africa, for the southern Saharan desert region, because we do see more precipitation than average, which would mean that you guys will be in a monsoon season, and the main development region won't experience much wind shear as a result of this monsoon. And you see in August it becomes worse, where pretty much the entire southern Saharan desert is receiving more precipitation than average, which certainly means that you guys will be in a monsoon this summer, and that will promote less wind shear overall and more easterly upper level winds, and that's going to enhance hurricane development in the main development region. And then headed into September, the anomalous amount of precipitation continues throughout the southern Saharan desert region, which is certainly concerning because that will definitely make wind shear light in the main development region. It isn't a major factor, I should say. I'd say there still needs to be a little bit more studies to make this 100% this method 100% valid, or as strongly correlated to hurricanes as, let's say, the Enzo pattern is. However, based off of the studies we've been seeing with precipitation and its correlation with tropical cyclone development in the main development region, more likely than not, we typically see more tropical cyclones in the main development region when there's more precipitation overall in the southern Saharan desert region, not only because there's more troughs, but because there's less wind shear as a result of monsoon. However, again, take it with a grain of salt because it isn't fully studied just yet, this method, but it does have at least some truth to it. And moving on to the next thing, moving on to the next forecast model, where the CFS, where we're going to take a look at the CFS wind shear anomaly forecast over the next several months. So this is right around the 200 millibar. This is right around the 200 millibar air pressure area when it comes to the wind and its anomaly compared to average. And pretty much if you're in the purple, there's less wind shear, and if you're in the reds, there's even more wind shear. So if we take a look, you see that a lot. The good news is that for the month of June, a lot of the main development region is under more wind shear than what you typically see. However, it isn't. However, it won't make that much of an effect when it comes to the amount of tropical cyclones you will experience this year. Because for one thing is that it's only the month of June, which isn't a very active, typically an active month when it comes to tropical cyclones. And another thing is that the main development region is pretty much dead during the month of June. So despite the fact that there was more wind shear than usual in the main development region during the month of June, it won't make much an effect at all, as the more concerning region during the month of June is right around the Gulf of Mexico and Caribbean, where unfortunately, yes, we do see less wind shear than usual, which would promote more hurricane development than what you typically see. And moving on to the month of July, you see that unfortunately there's the main development region begins to experience areas of less wind shear than usual, where we do see the purple show up, and this extends to the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico. So you should expect more tropical cyclone development as a result of less than usual wind shear. And then headed into August, you see a lot of the Atlantic is pretty much under average wind shear to below average wind shear, which would, I'd say, promote more hurricane development than not, because more of the Atlantic is covered in the purples than, let's say, the reds or oranges. And then headed into September, you see that it continues. We do see areas of less wind shear than usual, and we do see some areas in purple right around the coast of Africa. So I'd expect less wind shear than usual for the most part, for the most of the northern Atlantic, and this even extends to October. And yeah, guys, so overall, based off of what all the signs are pointing towards, we're going to experience less than average wind shear throughout the Atlantic for the most part, especially towards the Gulf of Mexico. So I think that will certainly promote more tropical cyclone development. But another thing we need to keep in mind of as well is the sea surface temperature anomaly all throughout the northern Atlantic, which will and if you don't know, warmer than average temperatures throughout the Atlantic would promote more tropical cyclone development. However, cooler than average temperatures throughout the Atlantic would promote less tropical cyclone development. And you see that over the next several months, the sea surface temperatures are just going to be much warmer than average all throughout the Atlantic. So I expect a much more tropical cyclones than usual for this year as a result of this, where we do see a main development region much warmer than averages, and it even gets worse right around the Gulf of Mexico and Caribbean, where the sea surface temperatures are even more well above average, and even the main development region. So I expect it to be a little bit more hyperactive than usual right around the Gulf of Mexico and Caribbean than, let's say, in the main development region. And what's worse is that if we take a look at my summer outlook I made a couple of weeks ago, you see that pretty much the entire lower 48 of the United States is expected to be warmer than average when it comes to air temperature, and that will rise the sea surface temperatures at an astonishing rate, to the point where it's going to be well above average of sea surface temperatures, and that certainly will promote a hurricane threat all throughout the United States, more specifically, obviously, the Atlantic coast of the United States. So it's certainly concerning that not only the sea surface temperatures, not only the wind shear will be less less than usual for this year, but the sea surface temperatures as well, and the air temperature will certainly promote more warmer than average sea surface temperatures all throughout the Atlantic. And you see that even right now we're experiencing warmer than average sea surface temperatures all throughout the Atlantic, while the main development region is currently cooler than average. I do expect it to rebound as a result of this warm pocket that's just to the north of it, and we're going to see that northerly current bring down that warm pocket into the main development region to make the sea surface temperatures warmer than average in the main development region. And moving on, another thing, taking a look at the overall amount of dry air you should expect throughout the Atlantic throughout the next couple months. The good news is that for the month of June, a lot more dry air, or it's expected to be much drier than usual throughout the Caribbean and mainly the Caribbean. However, it is expected to change into the month of July, where we do see more precipitation than usual right around the main development region. However, for the most part, the Gulf and the Caribbean are drier than average, which is certainly good news. And then moving forward, you see now, unfortunately, in the month of August, we do see the precipitation does increase throughout some of the main development regions when it comes to tropical cyclone development. And September, it's expected to be more moist than average. And I think it could promote more tropical cyclones right around the Gulf of Mexico. However, the good news is that the main development region has some pockets where it's drier than average, but it also has areas where it's more moist than average, so it could go either way, I think, when it comes to the amount of precipitation expected. And this extends to October as well. And in terms of the current amount of Saharan dust, right now we do see Saharan dust right around the Caribbean islands at this point. However, it isn't going to be anywhere last year, so I wouldn't say it's going to be a major threat for a lot of you guys right around the Caribbean and the Atlantic. So I wouldn't worry about the dry air too much. Unfortunately, that would limit hurricane development. And we also need to keep in mind that despite the amount of dust we saw last year, that it was still the worst hurricane season on record for the Atlantic. So the amount of dust we experienced early in the hurricane season does not at all dictate how active the hurricane season will be later in the future. It really all depends on how long that dust remains around, but I would expect it to remain around very long because there's just going to be too much precipitation throughout the northern Africa. And another thing we need to take a look at is the analog years. And what that pretty much means is that comparing this year to years that were very similar to the conditions we're experiencing this year, and based off of the analog years, you see that in 1996 we experienced 13 named storms, 9 hurricanes, 6 major hurricanes. 2001, 15 named storms. 2008, 16 named storms. 2011, 19 main storms, and 2017, 17 named storms. And 2017 was quite a crazy year when it comes to tropical cyclones. So while it might have not been as active as, let's say, 2020 hurricane season, it certainly is arguably more impactful because of how many potent hurricane landfalls we experienced in 2017. So although this hurricane season might not be as active as, let's say, last year, even if this hurricane season were to mimic any of these years, it will still be above average when it comes to the amount of tropical cyclones this year. So this is certainly something we need to keep in mind when making my forecast. And in terms of my forecast for this year, the average is 13 named storms, 7 hurricanes, and 3 major hurricanes. However, I have upped my forecast from 18 in my last hurricane season update to now 20, because based off of the evidence we're seeing, based off of now the computer model is more lenient towards bringing a La Nina during the peak of the hurricane season, as well as the less likely chance of wind shear throughout the Atlantic for this hurricane season. I suspect we're going to see a much more active hurricane season than usual. I don't expect it to be like last year's, but I do expect it to be more active than usual. But remember, all it takes whether it's more active or less active than usual. Remember, all it takes is one storm to completely change a community and completely change people's lives. So keep that in mind when taking a look at the hurricane season forecast. But anyways, guys, I thank you guys for watching. I rambled on long enough. I thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather content. Make sure to like if you like this video. Make sure to turn on post notifications if you want to see even more weather content. And I hope you guys have a good day.